Hello, crafty friends. This is Yana Smakula. Welcome back to my channel. In this video, I'm sharing some fun ink blending with you featuring products from Altenew. I'm using the Floral Odyssey Craft Your Life project kit, and this is a really cool kit. This is actually, I would say, like a two-part kit. So first you have a stamp set with the florals. And also you have a stencil with like an aerial view, like a map view. Here we have the stencil set, and the stencil, it actually includes 6 stencils. There are 2 stencils that coordinate with the flowers from this kit, and then 4 stencils that create that map view. That's what we'll be using, that map view stencils. When I saw these stencils, I was like, oh my gosh, this is just brilliant. I love a design like that, and I couldn't wait to use it. I wanted to make sure to show you the entire kit, but I'm not using all the products from the kit. I'm using that stencil, and then there's also a coordinating embossing folder that goes along with the stencil. That is just so brilliant. So the stamp set is very cool. It has beautiful florals like all Altenew stamps do, but it also includes sentiments, and the sentiments go really well with that stencil and also with another die that is part of this kit, and that die creates a compass. I'll show that in just a second. There are actually 2 die sets in this kit. There's one with the outline dies to die cut the florals out and die cut the sentiments, and there is a coordinating die to die cut every sentiment out. I have used 4 sentiments from this kit today because I have 4 cards, and I really like that I have coordinating dies to cut these out because I like to have my sentiments popped up on my cards. And here's a look at the die set with the compass. I'm not using that die set, but it is included in your kit. So I'm just going to move the products that I'm not using away, and we will get started with the stencil set. By the way, I have a special promo for you today, and this is 40% off Altenew storage pockets. The kit that I'm using today comes in one of these pockets, and I have found these pockets to be very durable and handy for crafty storage. The pockets are clear, as you can see, and they measure 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.5 by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, almost 11 inches. So it's a pretty good size pocket, and you can easily store coordinating supplies within one pocket. You can even put the projects that you're working on inside that pocket. One pocket holds a lot of supplies. As you can see, I'm putting my kit supplies into the pocket, and they all fit nicely. I could easily even add additional papers in, like, guides or stamped images, anything that I might have started working on but haven't finished. I often have projects in progress, and it's really helpful to be able to store them together with my supplies. So 40% off these storage pockets. Check the video description for the details. Okay, let's go ahead and get started on these cards. For these cards, I'm going to start with a larger sheet of paper just because of the size of the stencils. So the stencils will ink blend a 5.5-inch square surface for you. Because of that 5.5-inch square, I wanted to start with the same size paper. You definitely can cut your paper to a smaller size, to the size of your card, be it, at A2, so 4.25 by 5.5 inches, or if you're making a smaller card, or if you need a smaller panel, you can do that. But I wanted my paper to be the size of the stencil because I wasn't sure at this point which part of the stencil I would be using for my cards. And I have 4 cards for you today. Each card features a slightly different part of the stencil. That's another cool thing about stencils that are larger than A2. You can select the, part of the stencil that you like and use that for your card and have a slightly different design on each project you make. So I'm first starting with stencil layer number 3. Remember, we have 2 more stencils in this set. We're not using those. They coordinate with the flowers from that stamp set. Again, not using those. We're just using stencils number 3, 4, 5, and 6. I do have a sticky mat on my work surface here. I have my paper attached to the sticky mat, and I have the stencil sitting on top. Now, because I have just a little itty bitty room around the paper, of my stencil does grip onto the sticky mat, but I feel like that grip is not strong enough because I don't have as much stencil sticking onto the grip mat. I added a little bit of tape around the stencil. This just makes it more secure. I'm sure that my stencil is not going to move. Everything is nice and held in place, and I can start ink blending. I am going for a fall color combination today. With this stencil, you can create different seasons. I was going to say like 4 seasons, but no, you can do 3 seasons. You can easily do spring, summer, and fall. So I'm starting with fall. I want to do different colors for my cards. By the way, what you're looking at right now is the view from the top. Like if you are in an airplane, you're flying above a neighborhood and you look down, this is what you would see. You would see the tops of the trees, you would see the tops of the roads, you would see the tops of the houses. And this is the image that this stencil creates. Very clever. So I'm ink blending the trees first. And, when you're flying over a forest, for example, or a park, not all trees are the same color. You have a mix of colors. If that's fall, some are green, some are orange, some are yellow, some are red. This is the look that I want to recreate on my card with the help of these stencils. So I've started ink blending by using Snapdragon, and I used a large Altenew blending brush. I then came in with a terracotta ink, which is a nice orange, and used a smaller blending brush and added a little bit of this orange around the edges of some of the trees. I'm not being, very particular. I'm not masking sections of the trees, or I'm not masking individual trees. I'm applying color. I'm blending the color. So now I'm applying green. This is mossy maddow, and this green is going to mix in with the yellow because in nature, you don't really have harsh edges, It's not like you're going to have this section, like this one section yellow, and then this next section to it green. No, there's going to be a little bit of overlap. Even if one tree is completely yellow and the other tree is completely green, if the trees grow next to each other, the leaves, the branches will probably be touching. And even if you look on the ground, you'll have leaves from both trees mix on the ground because the wind blows, the trees are moving, the leaves are moving, the colors are moving. So this is the thought behind this background, behind the colors. And this is actually the thought for all of my cards today. You will see later that I have some other color combinations for you. I wanted to do other seasons. I have 2 spring cards to share with you with pinks and yellows and greens and purples. So I have the colors flowing and mixing and moving on the background. Next, I'm using green opal and a small blending brush, and I'm adding a little bit of the darker green around the edges of the green ink blended trees. Love that. This just helps create shading, helps create dimension, helps to add interest. And you don't have to do this if you don't want to. You can just do a solid layer of color. But with this layer, I felt like I could do a little bit more by using different colors of ink and also having different shades of ink. I feel like this particular product, the stencil set and also the coordinating embossing folder, this is one of those products that is a little bit more complicated. It's one of those products that requires some education. And personally, I love products like that because usually they let me create designs that are a little bit more complicated. But because they're complicated, they require a little bit more education. So this is why I'm doing this video, and I'm hoping that you will find this video helpful. So I have my green and yellow ink blended, and now I'm going to add a little bit of red because I feel like I don't have enough variety on this background. I'm using crimson and a small blending brush, and I'm adding red anywhere on the background where I feel like it. And I also go with red over green because I can do that, and that creates a little bit of brown. And we all know that there is brown in fall on the leaves. Some leaves will turn brown. I'm taking my time deciding where I want to add more color, where I'm happy with the color. And with that done, I'm going to remove my stencil, and you guys can see the beautiful result. By the way, the very first try took me about 30 minutes to ink blend the background. Every background that I blended afterwards went a lot quicker because I already knew what I was doing. I knew how I needed to align the stencils, but I just wanted to share that. I had fun. I enjoyed the process. So I'm going to remove the tape. I'm placing it onto my work surface. I'm not tossing it into the trash can just yet. I will reuse this tape for the other stencil layers, and we have our first layer blended. Right now it looks like a hot mess. It actually looks like some splatter, I think. Kind of cool too. So here is stencil layer number 4. This one is very easy to align. It just lines up over the things that you've already ink blended. And then I'm going to press down around the edges, make sure it grabs onto the sticky mat, and then add my tape just to make sure that nothing is going to move. I'm going to speed this part up a little bit. I don't want this video to take forever. Like I said, the process did take me quite a bit of time at first, but I figured it out, and the process went a little bit faster. So next I'm using velvet. This is the darker red, actually the darkest red that I have in my stash, and I'm using a small blending brush, and I'm ink blending the tree detail and also the tree shadows. You could also use gray ink here because some of the trees on this design, they are casting very long shadows. I would say this is probably late afternoon, so the shadows are pretty long. You can see those long shadows on the background. You'll see them better once I remove the stencil. But with the long shadows like that, you want the shadows to be dark and gray. I didn't want to do gray. I wanted to have, like a darker shade of the color that I was already using. So I'm using velvet. But you could also go over the velvet with gray and make it like a dark red gray if you wanted to. At this point, I realized that I needed to reposition my stencil a little bit because I felt like I didn't do a very good job, and I was having some white imperfections, some white un-ink blended lines. So I took some time, I repositioned it, and I went back to blending. I fixed the areas that were missing the ink with the velvet ink. And then I switched to a darker green. So I'm not using one color for all of for this entire layer. I am using 2 shades. So if I used yellow and red for my base layer, for some of the leaves, I'm now using red for those sections. And then if I used green, I'm using darker green. This is green opal. To add shading there. I did wipe my stencil clean using a dry cloth between the colors. I didn't want to have color contamination on my brush and also in my ink pad, so I made sure to wipe the stencil clean. Here, I'm also using espresso. This is the darkest brown in my stash, and I'm adding this color over some of the ink blended shadows, especially those long shadows, because I want them to look more natural. But like I said, you could also use dark gray here. I'm using brown because to me, this is a warm and sunny day. So the shadows are very, very warm. And I want this entire card to feel warm. I wiped my stencil and removed the tape. And here we can see the beautiful background. Now it is starting to take shape. You can probably discern some of the trees, some of the sections there. So it really starts to look nice. Moving on to stencil layer number 5, and this one ink blends several pieces, I would say. So this ink blends the roads as well as some areas next to the house. I'm going to use a black marker and outline sections of the stencil to help you better understand what I'm talking about. So you would need to position this stencil layer twice, align it twice, and ink blend this twice. The sections that I'm highlighting right now, these need to be ink blended separately. So first, you would position your stencil, mask these sections that I just outlined, ink blend the roads with, either light gray or light brown or whatever color you want to use for the roads. Remove your stencil, reposition it, align the sections that are outlined, mask the road sections, and ink blend those outlined sections. I used a black marker here because I wanted you to be able to see those sections better. They are etched on the stencil, so you can see them, but adding the marker makes it a lot easier to see these. I also used a cloth and I removed most of that marker from the stencil. You want to make sure to do that if you're doing the same thing. If you're using a Copic marker or any alcohol marker, you want to make sure to wipe most of that marker ink off. Because if you don't and you go to ink blend and you ink blend over that black, it's going to mix with your ink and will darken everything. So just make sure to do that. So I've positioned the stencil, and here you can see the areas that you need to pay attention to make sure that things are nice and aligned. Remember, we're now going to ink blend the roads. So I'm masking those sections that I outlined with my marker. I'm using a little bit of tape here. Now that everything is masked, I can use ink. I wanted my roads to look more like dirt roads, so I'm using sand dunes. This is a very nice light brown, and I'm ink blending the roads using that color. You don't need to do like a solid layer of color here. In fact, I feel like the more imperfect the blending on this layer, the better, because, a road is never one color. You do have different sections of the road. A part of the road could be wet, so it could look darker. For that, I'm using espresso here to make it look darker. You could also have something spilled on the road, like oil or something, and that would look darker as well. So just be creative, and play with the colors that you're using for the road. Wiping my stencil clean, going to remove it. Remove the tape from these sections that I just masked, and reposition the stencil on the paper. At this point, I actually made a mistake, and I wanted to talk about it so you guys don't make the same mistake. So I positioned one piece. You can see that I've taped around it, and I thought that I just need to ink blend this piece and then come back to the other pieces later. No. When I position this piece, I might as well go ahead and ink blend the rest of the pieces, because if I position and align this piece, the other pieces also fall into place nicely, and I don't have to come back to them later. Here, I use that same light brown ink to ink blend the road to the house there, but like I said, you could have ink blended the other sections as well using that light brown ink. I will come back to that later. I struggled a little bit. I tried to figure out the best placement. I couldn't figure that out. And I just gave up and I went onto stencil layer number 6. So here is stencil layer number 6, and this one also needs to be ink blended in 2 steps. There is a line in the center of the stencil. I've used my black marker again to make sure it is clearly visible for you guys. And I'm going to first position the right-hand side of the stencil, or align the right-hand side of the stencil. I've taped off I've masked off these sections of the stencil that I'm not going to blend. And as I tilt everything in the light, you can kind of see the lines that you need to look for when aligning this section. This one is not hard to align at all. Very easy. Okay, so we're first going to ink blend this large area, and this is a lake. By the way, make sure to check the guide on the packaging. Always super helpful to check the guide. If you're not sure what particular area is, look on the guide, see what color it's colored there, and that will give you a better idea of what color you need to use for your background. I'm using Aqualicious, and I'm coloring the the lake as well as the pools on my background. At this point, I realized that there's also one more pool next to this house on the right, and I added ink blending to that one as well. But this time I switched to a smaller blending brush. I needed like a detail blending brush, so I grabbed one from my stash. This is an angled brush, very small, and I used that to add color. By the way, the packaging that's included with the stamp set, with the Floral Odyssey stamp set, this one includes a detailed printout of how to color this stencil. So again, if you struggle, make sure to check there, have that on, have that by your side when you're ink blending, and this will make the process go faster and easier. So I ink blended the last pool using my detailed angled brush, and next I used espresso and I ink blended the roofs of the houses. I did mask that little pool over there on the right hand side to make sure I didn't add any brown over that, and just added the brown onto the roofs of the houses. You can make these whatever color you want, just think what colors are typically used for the roofs, because you want to make sure that these look realistic on your card. And I felt like brown is a good color. You could also use gray. Red is also a good color. We have a lot of red roofs where I live. So that's a good option. With that done, I positioned the other half of the stencil, so the left-hand side half of the stencil on my panel. This was very easy to align, not hard at all. I masked the areas that I did not need to ink blend. And here I'm using the Rocky Slope ink, and I'm just ink blending the rest of the roof sections using this lighter gray or brown. So I'm going to have a light and a dark brown roof. Going to pop my blending brush back into the storage case. By the way, I love this storage case. I store all of my detail blending brushes in there. Super handy. And now with that done, I can finally go back to the stencil layer number 5 and ink blend those missing pieces or missing areas. So these sections, they will ink blend the dirt in the yard or like in front of the house. So see how I positioned the stencil, see how I lined it up with that additional road that goes to the house in the center. It's that easy. So now I'm using sand dunes. It's the same color that I was using for the road before. And I'm just quickly ink blending the yards of these houses using this light brown. And our background is finished. Love it. I love it. It really does look like a perfect fall day. Now there is a coordinating embossing folder included in this kit, and that's just brilliant because you can use that embossing folder to add texture and dimension to your background. So now you have a 1-layer background, but you can use an embossing folder and really step it up. You can keep it as is if you want, but I feel like the embossing folder really adds a whole lot of interest to this background. This is very easy to line up. I just slide the paper inside the embossing folder and make sure that the lines, the edges of the shapes line up nicely. And next I'm going to emboss this in my Platinum 6 die cutting and embossing machine. This is actually my first time embossing with an Altenew embossing folder. And the sandwich that worked well for me is the A platform top. At this point, I realized I needed to tape the embossing folder closed because I felt like the paper was kind of moving inside a little bit. So I taped it closed using a little bit of Best of a Craft tape. So the sandwich for this embossing folder in my die cutting machine is the A platform top. Next, I added the F shim. I used 1 shim, although I feel like you could also use 2 shims. And then I have a D adapter plate on top. And this seemed to work well for this embossing folder and this paper. By the way, I feel like I forgot to mention the paper. This is Nina Solar White. Now, a word of caution and something to note. You will not get a perfect embossed image. So the embossing is not going to be lined up perfectly in every section of this stenciled background. That is just the nature of the paper. When you emboss the paper in your die cutting machine, the paper fibers stretch and move. And because of that, it's actually very difficult to have the embossed lines line up with the ink blended outlines. You will see that the embossing is not 100% perfect, but does it still look nice? You bet it does. It looks fantastic. The trees have detail, they have texture, they have dimension, they just look beautiful. Another thing I wanted to mention is embossing folder also has texture. So the inside of the embossing folder where, there's no raised or debossed areas, the flat side or the flat sections of the embossing folder, they also have texture. So when you emboss your paper, you're adding texture to those white areas as well. At first, I didn't realize that, the embossing folder did that, and kind of felt like it messed up my background, my paper. But no, it does that. And in the end, it actually ends up looking really cool. Okay, I trimmed my background to just a little bit smaller than 4¼ by 5½ inches, and I foam mounted the background onto a light blue card base created using the Dewdrops cardstock from Altenew. So I created an A2 side folding card base. I also wanted to add some detail. I love to add detail to my cards, little dots. And I used the fine liner pen set from Altenew. I played with the different pen sizes, and I figured that the 0.2 and the 0.1 sizes worked best here. So I just went ahead and I added little dots onto the background, like next to the road to mimic road signs, next to the trees to create like faux people walking next to those trees, or even little dots next to the pool as if there's somebody, sitting by the pool. I just wanted to add something else here. I also decided I needed to decorate the card with gems. So here I use the mother of pearl gems from Altenew. I first cut my gems out using scissors from the carrier sheet. I didn't remove them. I didn't adhere them right away. That's what I'm trying to say. I first cut the carrier sheet using scissors. I placed the gems onto my paper, onto my background to figure out the placement. And once I was happy with the placement, that's when I removed the carrier sheet and I adhered the stencils onto the background. I do have 2 cards created using this color combo. So this is card number 1, and here's another card. For this card, I didn't do any black dots, and I also didn't do any pearls, just to show you the 2 side by side. Love them both. Now, I mentioned you can use this stencil to create different seasons. You probably won't be able to do winter season because the trees would be without the leaves, but you can easily do spring, summer, and fall. I just showed you how you can do fall because, well, it's fall right now and the colors are all beautiful around me. We do have 4 seasons where I live. I hope you guys have 4 seasons where you live too. But here is one where I did with spring colors. I ink blended the background using pink diamond, pink calicious, and rubellite for the pink trees, and then maple yellow and snapdragon for the yellow trees. I added a little bit of green using mossy meadow, and then used espresso, rocky shore, and sand dunes for the roads and the rooftops. So love that. By the way, here's another background that I created, and this was actually my very, very first test background. And you can see how horrible that one looks. So I'm showing you this background to tell you that sometimes when you're using the product for the very first time, things don't always go according to plan. So don't get discouraged. But also with that background, I tried to add ink to the white areas using my embossing folder. That's another trick you can do. Something else that you can try because I didn't like how much white I had on my original background. And I was able to add the green onto the background. It was a little bit of a dotted green. It wasn't like a solid layer of green. But again, that worked because it was like a nice green texture if you want to give it a try. And here's another background that I did. This one is like a wisteria lane with purples and greens. I used wisteria, hydrangea, and ultraviolet, as well as mossy meadow, green opal, the same greens that I used before, and then espresso, sand dunes, and aqua licious for the background. You can ink blend these backgrounds in so many different colors. I hope you guys are going to give this kit a try. This stencil and the embossing folder combo, they are fantastic. The florals are amazing as well. By the way, the sentiments that I have on my cards here, they all come from the Floral Odyssey stamp set that is a part of this kit. So here's one final look at the cards I have for you today, created with the Floral Odyssey Craft Your Life project kit. Thanks so much for joining me today. Love you guys, and I'll see you again next time. Bye.